Boris Gloskov. During the coming hour, I'll be the moderator of what will take place here. It could be a discussion or just a presentation, a series of presentations. Why do I think that this subject matter about cybersecurity in telecom will always key in any aspect of cybersecurity? This is why, because cybersecurity per se and data transfer takes place through telecom operators. It's obvious. So the first one who encounters real cyber attacks and cyber threats, who sees that is the telecom operator. The subject matter like cybersecurity in telecom and the telecom operators who are inbuilt, this agenda will be always relevant when the internet, while the internet is in use. In this regard, we have here today 4 speakers from various countries. In a sense, we have a global agenda. During this hour, we discuss various surveys, not only about telecom. Of course, it will be the emphasis. We'll speak more extensively, so we'll not emphasize only the telecom, as I said. In this connection, I'd like to introduce our today's participants. Valery Shorzhin, member of the board, vice president of MTS company. Jacqueline Kernon, partner in cybersecurity, Ernst & Young. Alan Salim Kabalong, assistant secretary cybersecurity and enabling technology. He's from the Republic of Philippines. And Yogesh Malik, technical director, CTO, VION company. So, in this membership, we'll discuss today how telecom, the industry and cybersecurity have been interacting over the past years. I'll designate several issues, and at the end I'll tell you we'll take 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So, please, you can pile up right now your questions. We are lucky today. We have very interesting speakers here, and they are not many. Oftentimes it's vice versa. So it's a rare occasion that you can communicate extensively, not hurry, but just interact quietly. So the beginning question to every speaker. What relevant trends we can witness right now in cybersecurity as applied to telecom? What the actual picture, because everybody enjoys some record of working in telecom or playing there as a regulator. Really interesting to know some general outlook of you. Generally, we'll be also interested, well, I would suggest everybody speak up about national neutrality, network neutrality regulation, because we see right now that regulation in various countries varies with regard to telecom providers. In a big perspective, when we have a synergy against cyber threats based on common standards and common regulation, we can see a reverse trends right now that some local regulation varies in its terms, and we get a somewhat patchy world. However good it sounds, but we should create some synergy against cyber attacks. Of course, it's a controversial trend. I'd like to suggest that we debate on that. Overall, it's also important, education, because in most countries I've communicated with, do not let many professionals or lack professionals in cybersecurity. So the national regulators and telecom operators, it's hard for them to cope with the growing number of hackers being short of professionals. So it's a very extensive agenda today. So we expect from you, when we're preparing there in one of the meeting rooms, I spent half an hour with my colleagues and I learned many new things, personally for myself. So I assure you, our colleagues will answer almost any questions of yours relating to cybersecurity, not only in telecom. There are many professionals here. Anyway, so I'm wrapping up with my long introductory remark and I'd like to give the floor now to Jacqueline Kernon, And my question to her is, because she has worked for long at the power company, she was an employee of the Australian telecom operator, now she is a partner of Ernst & Young. Normally we ask people who worked in a consulting company probably to draw up some broad picture of what takes place in the industry at the margin of telecom and cybersecurity, because Jacqueline's experience is just relevant for that. Could you kindly take some 10 to 15 minutes, depending how much you need actually, to explain what's the current direction of progress of the telecom industry as a whole, and what relevant trends we can witness right now, and what has become relevant over the last year, and so on. Thank you.
Push button, please. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I wasn't sure it was turned on. So hopefully the translators can work out my Australian accent. It's lovely to be here. I think generally the trends for telcos globally are very similar. The technology requirement to roll out is becoming more extensive in terms of the cost of things like 5G, etc. The margins are slimming because a lot of these technologies are becoming commoditised really, and as a result, the telcos are caught in the middle. I found it very interesting, the plenary session for those who were there, really that the responsibility was split almost evenly at 41 and 42% between the user and the service provider, and there was very little responsibility for the state or government. And I think that probably is one of the biggest driving trends in terms of the fact that really governments have struggled, as we heard, with an international framework and a lack of a regulatory framework that's consistent across countries, as well as a framework that covers things like attribution and, ways of actually tracking down, identifying and stopping cyber criminals, that has fallen to the telcos as an almost quasi-regulation capability in terms of being able to cooperate, to share information and intelligence. Really, if you think about the number of threat intelligence companies and the way that telcos do threat intelligence at a very high level, and in Australia we have one large telco, Tier 1 telco Telstra, which is where I used to work, and then we have several other telcos operating. However, in terms of who sees the most traffic in the Australian network, I think Telstra sees about 75% of the Australian traffic in the network. So really being able to give the responsibility of identifying threats to a government agency is really very difficult. And so I think that's echoed similarly across the board in various countries where service providers and application companies, in the cases of certain applications, are being held responsible to provide some sort of policing or at least identification of threats and attribution in the absence of the governments being able to mount a consistent response. And certainly what we've seen is echoed in the financial services industry. Generally, we see all types of different regulations. So obviously here in Europe, GDPR is extant. There are US regulations. In Australia, CPS 234 is the most recent prudential regulation standard that's been released. And that's driving some excellent cybersecurity goals. But we see a lot of individual banks in Australia who are really struggling with what they do. So they might have their parent company in China or the US, and many of their services are provided by that parent company in China or the US, and they have a different standard. So Australia might regulate for, say, a 72-hour breach notification, which is the APRA CPS 234 standard. However, their Chinese parent company might have a 96-hour, or they might have a 2-day, or there might be a different regulation. So I think standardisation of regulations globally is obviously going to be a big driver for this, but in the absence of that standardisation, a lot of the responsibility is unofficially falling to service providers globally, and it's a very difficult thing to pick up given the commoditisation and margin pressure that most of those telcos are feeling. As my colleague mentioned earlier, there's still a need to support 2G and 3G and a 5G rollout, and it's becoming more expensive with less money to throw at the problem. In the meantime, there's perhaps governments are not generally stepping up to an intergovernmental framework that's providing an easy way to kind of hand this problem over. So I think margin pressure and an inability to perhaps control everything is meaning they need to take matters into their own hands, and that's an expensive business. So they're probably the big trends for telcos that we see, and it sounds like they're echoed consistently here as well.
Спасибо большое, Жаклин.
Thank you, Jacqueline. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask two questions. You mentioned there are serious obstacles and a challenge that the overall regulation and the related standards that need to be generated for cybersecurity. Clearly, could you kindly share your vision how it could be implemented technologically? Who should deal with that? Not only one country, of course. Could be some multinational associations. Could we start with that?
There's, as there always is, there's layers of regulation. I think the first one is probably to look at technical standards which hardware and software vendors comply to. And obviously in Australia and elsewhere we have seen the banning of certain types of technology with the recent announcement of China encouraging companies that are based there to collect. Australia certainly has now banned the use of Chinese technology in government systems, and I think that makes things very difficult in terms of the operational costs going forward. So I think driving intergovernmental or unified standards across the industry and across countries for technology is really important. We had a really interesting discussion, and I won't steal anyone's thunder, earlier about regulation for so-called ethical hacking, and perhaps penetration testing is a less controversial word. There's the standardisation of training for penetration testing and various types of skill sets, and then the standardisation that needs to happen around clearances, etc. Certainly between certain certain countries that have great regulatory frameworks of working together. So in Australia, we're obviously allied with Five Eyes in terms of Australia, the US, Canada, New Zealand and the UK. So information sharing in terms of providing clearances, etc. Is relatively simple in those countries. Other countries not so much. And I think that's one of the other trends that we're seeing, and we're moving into this digital age from what has been the post-industrial age really. And what we're seeing is that the nation-state concept that we all subscribe to as kind of where we've come from is really thoroughly unprepared to deal with the environment we now have, where the internet isn't state-based, it's not nation-based. Languages, here I am at a conference in Russia speaking in English with an Australian accent, and someone's translating, which is great, but that certainly wouldn't have been possible 50 years ago. So where we have come from and the regulation we have in terms of the organisations which are supposed to provide that regulation are probably not going to cut it where we're going. And so cybersecurity as the biggest kind of problem with the digital age that we have is really starting to break a lot of the paradigms and highlight issues that perhaps we hadn't really seen or didn't have before. So there perhaps wasn't a need to communicate so quickly with other countries in terms of threat intelligence, etc., almost in real time. In any other paradigm or in any other, if you're going to catch a criminal in one country, you've got time for them to catch a plane or a train to get to another country. But obviously the internet doesn't work like that. It's much faster. Although not in Australia, apparently our internet speeds are below Thailand's, which is a bit of a worry. But certainly for everybody else, we're operating at digital speeds, and we need to be able to mount a digital response. So I think we're really going to have to create some of the frameworks, and that means industry and governments working together. And I think that's probably leads to one of the other trends that is becoming much more extant globally, is we're seeing industry and government collaboration on a scale that we probably hadn't seen before in order to address the threat.
Спасибо большое, что прояснили. И у меня еще один вопрос.
Thank you for your clarification. I have another question. I understand that your company is the largest operator in Australia. You said that 75% of the traffic is accounted for by this company, and there are some other players in the market. Some local telecom operators. Could you kindly tell us, between these companies operating in telecom, are there some arrangements or mechanisms, some communities, some infrastructure of data sharing, data exchange regarding cyber threats? These infrastructures are being built now, those like CERT, emergency response teams, cyber. Do you have such operator in Australia, such an agency? They share cyber threats? Do you have such an agency in your country?
And like many countries, and I'm not sure how the regulatory framework is here, but we're quite confused. However, we're finding sort of some order through the chaos, but probably not in as constructive a manner as we could. So most of the telcos still operate in a relatively siloed mode. There is some individual threat sharing, which is not kind of regulated for. It's more a matter of these people realising we're a small country and we all know each other, thankfully. Otherwise we'd be in trouble. Regarding government regulation and frameworks, we have had a lot more involvement and input with our national security frameworks. So we were talking earlier about the formation of the Australian Joint Cyber Centres, and which is part of ASD or our NSA equivalent. I'm not sure what the equivalent is here in Russia, but our Signals Directorate is basically coordinating a government civil response capability that brings that together. We have had a CERT, obviously, as a country for a long time, and that does share some information, but probably the speed that it needs to collaborate with is probably making that less useful unless there's an actual, probably digital framework, really, unless we're doing a lot of this collaboration at the speed of machines. It's not that useful to have a meeting every week about some of these issues. However, we do have some both casual and regulated frameworks and government involvement in frameworks that is becoming more important. But I really think there's a huge place for regulation as well as individual and company collaboration, because as we all know, the bad guys are not operating the way that we operate in siloed companies, where we're competing with each other on a company level, so we don't share information. Perhaps two banks might be competing with each other, so they wouldn't necessarily want to share information on any other level, but cyber is breaking the paradigms there. So I think it's bringing everyone together. And, obviously that's what needs to happen to be able to combat the threat.
Спасибо большое, Жаклин.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'd like to suggest to talk to Salim. We have a question rather more targeted, more specific. We know that in your republic, since last year, you introduced a bill, a law on ubiquitous implementation of cyber, in sort of digital identification. And you have now action plans on the National Cybersecurity Center to be established. Are you involved in that? Could you kindly probably tell us, if it's possible, to highlight a bit the digital ID program? Because for this country, this problem is becoming highly relevant. I'd like to share with you that in our digital economy program, national digital economy program, intended to digitalize the country as a whole, there are some activities planned with regard to electronic passports or ID certificates to be introduced. In your republic or with your international partners, you have some experience. Could you share with us on that? And individually about the National Cybersecurity Center, how you are going to develop it. Do you have some outcomes so far? What your action plans are for the future? And I'll have more questions about regular hacking.
Yes, the Philippines has signed or enacted a law with regard to the national ID system. So we call that PhilSys. So basically, the function of the Department of ICT is regards to cybersecurity. So we will advise the Philippine Statistics Authority in crafting or in implementing the national ID system. So basically, we are a cybersecurity regulator in the Philippines. So right now, we are currently talking with the PSA with regard to the Registration Authority security. So once it will be implemented, then all the registration to that system should be assured, meaning it should pass through our public key infrastructure system. And our current development right now, we are still in the talking stage, initial stage. It's not yet being implemented since we are a huge country also. So we wanted to have more inputs also from other countries. And we are open to work with any states so that we can also gather best practices to be applied in our country. As regards to the National Cybersecurity Center, we have implemented already the National Cybersecurity Center. Though it's not yet in the full implementation stage, it is being constructed by our third-party partner. So it passed through a rigid bidding, public bidding, and then the purpose of this National Cybersecurity Center is to share information, as our good friend from Australia has said that we need to share information. And cybersecurity in the telecommunication industry is very important, and it is our primordial concern to communicate, to share information with the telecommunication industry. As we all know here that the telecommunication industry, the ISPs, are the gateways to our telecommunication industry, to the end users. So thus we need to cooperate, share information, threat information, just to clarify, so that we can protect our internal network in the government as well as in the private sector. So the National Cybersecurity Center is a platform where everybody shares information, threat information. For example, if there's an attack, a ransomware, for example, from the telco that they detected, they can contribute to our national platform, our project, our National Cybersecurity Center project, so that this center will be able to communicate with other agencies or other sectors. So in the Philippines, we identified 12 critical sectors, critical information infrastructure sector, including the power, oil and gas, telecommunications, government, health system, and so on and so forth. So with this, the National Cybersecurity Center, with this platform, we will be able to at least mitigate risk by sharing information. Because if one sector will be affected by a malware, for example, then this malware can be shared to the National Center. This National Center will be able to process countermeasures and give back to other agencies that has not yet been affected. And I believe in cybersecurity, we need to share threat information. Not just one country, but all of us. Hackers or criminals are just there. Their focus is only to hack, but defense is very, very difficult. Finding hole is very easy, but finding where to tap the holes are very difficult. So I believe we should work together to achieve a secure, safe, and robust cybersecurity. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Алан. Я хотел бы еще вопрос по поводу...
Thank you, Alan. Another question regarding your national cybersecurity. You've mentioned several industries which are part of your infrastructure, oil and gas, and energy, and telecom, and other industries also. But among all those, telecom segment is very important because telecom networks, are the first to suffer from cyber attacks. And this is what we can see. So it means that telecom segment must be of priority, top priority for you. And correspondingly, my question, you've said the key challenge is to properly exchange information. Do you have any specific plans or maybe program how to install, for instance, certain sensors to detect threats automatically?
Actually, that is part of the plan to put sensors to the sectorals. Right now, our plan is to put sensors to all government agencies. Of course, they are using telco for internet access. And eventually, the plan is to connect with telco industries to share information about threats. And with this, we would be able to identify and mitigate specific threats, not just like a shotgun approach that you kill everything. But our approach is we want a directed approach. We want to have information that we can convert to knowledge, so that we can really cure specific threats, and that will not be possible without the telco. Telco is a vital part of cybersecurity. As I've said, telco is the heart of every connection that we have. They are the highways, and we have to put checkpoints on the highways so that we can catch criminals. So I think that's the best thing that we should do, is to cooperate with telco. And in the Philippines, we have this third telco coming in, and when they come in, they need to be compliant to the cybersecurity guidelines that we issue. Not just that, this third telco will be the first to comply, and the two other telcos will have to comply as well.
Спасибо большое, Алан. И мы уже имели некий разговор.
Thank you. We've already had an interesting discussion. You shared your experience, and you talked about good hackers, so to say. It was new knowledge for me, and would you kindly elaborate and describe your practice of working with good hackers? How do you select them? How do you earmark them? How do you invite them for cooperation? How do you invite them to work?
Yeah, taming hackers is very difficult. You need to convince them to be ethical. The borderline between a good hacker and a bad hacker is like a hair, So you need to give them at least guidance on these are the things that if you do this, then you'll be jailed. In the Philippines, you have a cybercrime law. So we convince or we persuade these young hackers or IT professionals to be in the good side, or in the bright side, to help the government. Actually, we detected many threats with their help, without paying them. We have this group that shares information. Once they see even in the telco network, once they see that there's a threat, there's a data leak, they inform us right away. Or we have a national cert, by the way. The national cert will be informed by them. So when selecting them, of course, you have to select the attitude. The skills can be honed, can be improved, but the attitude cannot, right? So once they have this good attitude towards their country, towards what they're doing, well, I believe that the skills as a hacker can also be on the bright side. I admit that it's very difficult. We are human. So sometimes, if we are on stress, we do things differently. So if we are good now, we can be bad tomorrow. So I believe the motivation, the support that they can get from the government is very important.
Спасибо большое. Я тоже абсолютно убежден в том, что хакер.
Thank you much. I understand, and this is also my understanding, that hacking is engineering art. It is not good or bad, it is engineering art. And the challenge is to make sure that great professionals work in the interests of the good. we should not blame hackers for being hackers. It's like blaming architects for being architects or engineers for being engineers. And now I would like to give the floor to telecom operators. Yogesh, VEON is a multinational company. Dozens of nations work with the VEON, and you have interesting views regarding penetration, and it is very interesting to listen to your understanding of current developments in terms of cybersecurity. What are current trends? What are problems with the cooperation? Because when you work in Algiers, for instance, it is one environment. You work in Kazakhstan or in Russia, environment is absolutely different, and interaction with local operators is different. So this is why your company is multinational, and this is why it's so interesting to listen to you.
Спасибо за приглашение. Thank you. Меня русский очень плохо, но I will try. I'll try.
My Russian is not that good.
So thank you. I would start with two things. This is a very complex topic, yet extremely interesting. So I would start with two things. The first one is, and I was taught when I was a kid, devil is in the details. It is not at the high discussion, it's right where it happens, whether it's dark web, whether it's... So devil is in the detail, that's number one. And second, my kids go to the scouts, and scouts are known for beavers, cubs, and explorer. And they teach one thing, which is be prepared. Their motto is be prepared. And I resonate a lot with both of these things. As telco, you mentioned, we are at the assurance end. So we are actually the first smart screen. Some people don't even have keys, like we can enter the offices with the phone and application. Some hotels, you don't need keys. So apart from phone, your credit card, and in some countries, you can pay with your phone too. So the phone and telco becomes a very, very important dynamic in the future. Maintaining 2G while upgrading to 5G or future generation is a big challenge, because you're kind of going to the manual things and you're going to the fully automated world, and you want to control both. So I think for us, as you mentioned, Algiers, as you mentioned, Kazakhstan, we have Pakistan, Bangladesh, other countries, Uzbekistan. It is very important for us to stay ahead of the curve, to work together, to be open to learn. And we see that once we are open to learn and we can mix the local compliance together with the global vision, we can, whether it is ransomware, whether it's WannaCry, whether it's Petya, we can be more prepared. Whether we'll handle it full or in some scale depends upon the attack, but we are more prepared than we would be if we were just doing at the local level. So that's one thing. The second thing, which I would say, no one has the full answer. This is a never-ending journey. So for me, to say that someone has the full answer, whether it's a partner or a nation, I would say this is a continuous uplift. Some nations understand it faster, quicker. Some nations take a longer time, not because they don't want to understand, because it's low on a priority list somewhere. Digitizing the economy has not gone that far. And for us, we are dealing with both now. We have extremely advanced nations, extremely advanced city, like this one, Moscow, and we have extremely upcoming city, like Dhaka. And both cities have their own flavors, and we need to prepare networks for both. So our view is continuous learning. Our view is be prepared. Our view is to embrace the tools. And I really, I don't think I'm uncomfortable. Personally, I just don't understand the dilemma, ethical hacker. It's just to be prepared. You need skills. You don't have the skills, you need to get certain skills, and how do you get that? So I don't think we need to label things. I think we should prepare ourselves. So that's the way we work. And we diversify. We do not just, not to say we don't rely, but we rely on our judgment, which is properly anchored in diversification. So that's the way we take it.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Another question. You work in many countries. Now, a more difficult question. Which country where VEON operates has internet regulation the strictest, the hardest regulation? So in which countries where VEON operate, where regulation is strictest and where is the mildest, the softest, because you have a very wide geography, including Africa and Asia. If you compare, for instance, Russia and Algiers and Pakistan, this is a purely expert question. It is very interesting, really interesting to listen to your opinion. Which nation, which state regulates internet more strictly?
I think it really depends. It really depends. It would be wrong of me to make a judgment. But I do see countries, even the same countries, advancing. The more we see penetration of financial services, the more we see penetration of social networks, the more we see penetration of digitized economy, the regulation matures much faster. Consent becomes different for assurance and for service providers. I learned this from service providers. So we thought we were service providers, but there are service providers on us as well. So I think that maturity happens, like Kazakhstan has very advanced data laws, and that's very good, and we need to abide to them. So for me, I think every country has progressed in the last 5 years. And as, like Ukraine, the traffic on internet is very high. Though 4G came very late, the traffic on internet is very high. So their laws on internet regulation are also very advanced. Russia by itself, and the other countries are coming up. So I just feel like the same country snapshot over time is different. And I think what we need to do is both educate, but also learn and see where do we play in the ecosystem.
Спасибо большое, да, очень системный ответ.
Thank you much. This is a very good answer. A very specific question. In our country, there is a law. There is Yarovaya law. Well, what it means? This law means that operators, telecom operators, providers must ensure storage of all traffic for 6 months in order to counteract terrorism. This is a very serious bill and very expensive for providers, because telecom operators have to invest a lot in order to buy hardware to store such an amount of data. And that was a very difficult bill to approve. So I would like to ask you, you work in Russia, you have to comply with Russian laws. Are there any other geographies, other nations where they have the same requirements in terms of data storage for 6 months?
Valerie can help as well, given it's very specific. Our view is we comply with the laws, we work, and we understand that there are differences in different markets. There was a time when in certain countries, the HLR records were going to be kept for a very long time. A system record on voice would be for a very long time because of the national security and stuff. So I think that's the way we take it. We also use the latest technologies, work with the latest technologies to make sure at least that we can use the efficiency with the Moore's law, which we get. So I think that's the way we do it. But maybe Valerie can comment more on that.
Безусловно, мы как раз к Валерии уже подошли.
Well, actually, we are approaching to Valerie slowly. Valerie is my favorite competitor. I am from Rostelecom, and Valerie is MTS. And we have profound respect for our colleagues. So MTS is a major Russian telecom company with a great number of subscribers and customers. Very much like us, you are in the same environment. Speaking about cyber security, you are a major national player. Is cybersecurity just for yourself, for your company, for your customers, for your subscribers, or do you have a wider vision? Could you share your understanding of the current situation? Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon, colleagues. Before I start answering the question, I would like to say a couple of words about my overall vision of the situation, what's happening with telecom. Well, I'm not going to create a comprehensive picture. I'm sure you are familiar with the analyst reports and so on. But still, what do I see? What's happening? Latest developments. Three things I would like to draw your attention to. So we have to understand what's happening at the edge of a network, in the network, and at the end of a network. So at the border of a network. So we see the very quickly growing number of connections, Internet of Things, and we'll see billions of connections as a result. So we'll see new types of connectors. We'll see changes in gadgets which help human beings to use internet technology.
Some voice assistants that help us communicate verbally quite naturally. As for the data transmission channels, the general talks about 5G. Well, in principle, 5G is one of the pioneering standards in mobile communication that quite intended quite in earnest to be used industrially. Also securing certain services quality for various customers. In principle, 5G is positioned as a network not only for a mass consumer but also for industries. It's probably the prime cause of the trade wars all of us are witnessing. It so occurred that currently the United States do not have presently their original equipment manufacturers, while China does have those. As for the network nucleus, firstly, I'd like to reiterate. Everybody discusses digitalization, 3.3.0. Now we see mature big data processing on a large scale industrially. Also, artificial intellect is involved there to manage that. All of it results in a change in the cyber threats model and the perpetrators' behavior. If we recall the perpetrators, the law offenders, for instance, at the end of the 1990s, the target of their attack was primarily the telecom infrastructure. Those people wanted to get hold of passwords to use a mobile app on a free basis or to talk internationally, to do some business on that. The first goal of the ill-doers, or the goal itself, there were not so many users, and the level of maturity and knowledge of those was comparable with the hackers, with the attackers. Those were the 1990s. In the years 2000s, the primary object for them was the user primary data, personal data. They hunted a varied category from credit card numbers to some personal data, personal photos. But the primary target of their attack was the personal data of users. Now, when we're moving to the digital world, with so many transactions underway, lots of business relations, and now the object of the attack is becoming the digital assets, irrespectively what they are. Either some data about subscribers, users, clients, or just a digital currency that also can be stolen from your purse, digital purse. No doubt, all of it modifies the requirements to cybersecurity. The one telecom operators work with as well. And in this regard, it's changing dynamically. We used to say that we have to maintain 2G, 3G, 4G, now 5G is coming at the same time. These networks have most varied architecture and typology. Also regarding cybersecurity, the operators in this case have to do many things at the same time. First of all, we are responsible before our users. More than 100 million we have those. And we are responsible before them for the services we provide to them. Unfortunately, oftentimes, these users are not that digitally smart, not adequately smart. We also work on that. When using the data we gather from the network infrastructure, we tailor user behavior models to see what devices, systems are contaminated with malware. More than 50% follow our recommendations about antivirus programming. And we also track closely where these users go, and we block malware links, probably 200,000 a year we block of those, and to 500 million links of users we also block. And we also provide training to our users. As a rule, we use social programs to work with most vulnerable users, the aging people. Well, we also teach them how to behave in the internet and use digital services, and also the youth. Young people are different. They like bullying, and you need to bring it through to children, the behavior algorithm in case of bullying. This is the first area of our competence. That is the users. The second area, which is also our responsibility, that is infrastructure and the network infrastructure protection. They are still, unfortunately, remaining the subject of various attacks and onsets and ingressions. A lot depends on this infrastructure, not only also our business as a mobile operator. But the business of the majority of companies going digital. Well, may God save us if mobile communication fails in Moscow. It will be harder to actually travel through the city, by the way. Yeah, even to grab a taxi. The navigators and many habitual services will be out of view. So the protection of network and communication infrastructure, personal data protection. Well, this is our mandate under law. We, as a telecom operator, we must follow that, but it's also a responsibility before our consumers and the society. The third aspect is governmental behavior. MTS company is a member, a player in the public field, and we share information there about some notifications, about relevant attacks, and we interact with other players in the market. Also, we have tailored, streamlined our security operations center, like many other telecom operators. And the security operations center, COC services, we not only use those for our needs, but also provide those to the consumers at their request. The MTS company gives a high priority to the corporate market, including, well, we were the net telco products based on the IoT, Internet of Things technologies, and artificial intellect systems. When offering IoT solutions, we embed cybersecurity as a sanitary need. Even not having some requests from our corporate customers, we use some standard protections by default for our services. Clearly, we can, at customers' request, enhance this cybersecurity, including crypto protection. We provide as the basis to everybody. And the last point, some products, our MTS company, our subsidiaries, including large-size business integrators, many of our customers, also customers of our telecom services in parallel, and the consumers of those comprehensive solutions. In principle, our portfolio features the products that are intended for cybersecurity. We partner with many companies domestically and internationally, and we certainly extend our product line. As for the Yarovaya law, Yarovaya is a member of our parliament. The Yarovaya law, as far as I can imagine, the world is tailored variously, but some similar requirements, they're not always put on the shoulders of operators. The regulator should provide information, and the regulator takes on the possibility for storing this information, and at the end of the day, and all of it is shifted on the shoulders of the consumer as tax. The consumer pays eventually for everything. In principle, some comparable requirements is for the storage term, which to information blocks, they do exist. I would support my colleagues. That bill was passed, Yarovaya bill was passed, all of us abide by that, and we tailor the respective system to maintain that. I think it would be strange if you would have said something different on that, about the law. Well, not abide by law.
I think the example which occurred to me this morning, normally I use Uber, and I was trying to call Uber, but they told me update the application, and it's now Yandex. And a lot of things would have happened on the data consent from one ecosystem to other. And it just shows that this world is moving on very, very fast. So for people to say that they know the answer, then look at a snapshot, is going to be difficult to find a universal answer. And I think that's where the challenge really lies. How can we give end consumer confidence that as telcos, we are assurance layer As service providers, they really care when ecosystems shift. And as countries, we develop. So I think that's at least a point I just wanted to reflect.
Thank you.
I might just note we've implemented similar laws a little while back, and it's very interesting to see that coming here to Moscow, it's very neat and clean and tidy, and obviously everyone's very well behaved. The metadata retention laws didn't go down so well in Australia, and you're right, it really is basically forcing it back onto consumers instead of putting it into tax. And we did actually have some Australian hackers hack into parts of the Australian government as a protest. So I'm assuming that didn't happen here, but certainly we have similar laws with a similar burden, and you know, we've had a really interesting framework because it sounds like you two are similarly sized, and certainly at 100 million subscribers, that's huge compared to, you know, our whole country's 24 million people. But you know, as we said, one telco is a tier one telco and has a large percentage of the market, and the other telcos are, you know, competitor telcos. So to leverage the same requirement for infrastructure on them is disproportionate. So it was a huge debate and went down for a long time. And it's really interesting, your comments here, Jess. I don't think any of the metadata retention is about making anyone more secure. It's more about helping the governments find things when they need it, which may or may not contribute to our overall security. That's arguable.
Спасибо большое.
Yeah, thank you. What do you think? On my part, I have the last question, and before I would suggest that we go to Q&A. We have discussed a lot today. That's important to share information, to lower risks, to enhance cyber threat control. There are many cybersecurity centers already available in many countries, or some service operator associations can share this information, and the government of Philippines would like to automate all this data exchange, to install sensors on the networks of government agencies. It's all clear. I have one question that needs only one brief answer. It's the same question to all of you. Only one answer is expected. Could you kindly mention the year, in your opinion, when data sharing about cyber threats between telecom operators would be exercised not nationally but internationally? When one operator, national operator, would automatically transmit data about cyber threats to some other country? Why? Well, this automated notification exchange implies that certain standards are available, the infrastructure is available, there is regulation, and only then we would see the end result, the internet and the internet operators, telecom operators counter the threats smartly, and they automatically exchange this data not only in one country but in several countries or associations of those. Could you mention the year, in your opinion? What are your expectations, your forecast? When will it take place? When will it come true? Please, one by one. Yogesh, you first, please. What year?
Specific. I might not be that specific. So my view is the following, and this is my view, and our view, that we are living in different worlds. From voice to data, GRX took a long time. The exchange to go data from voice. Voice interconnect was good between nations. Data interconnect took time. Cyber sharing between countries after GDPR means GDPR plus the world is going to take time, and reliance on each other. And the automation piece will need massive regulation to occur between the countries where trade happens today, the 5 countries or the 20 countries or 50 countries. So I think it would be hard to nail a date, but I think this is the path. This is the path. The intensity and pace will depend upon the interest of the parties and the state.
Да, спасибо за ответ. Он, конечно, был не конкретный, но очень короткий.
Of course, your question was not your answer was not that specific, but it looked fine. Your answer, please.
I believe there's a platform for information sharing globally. We have the national cert for every country that would share information to the other certs. Actually, we have the Asia Pacific cert. We have the first that shares information among its member. So that's why in our country we have the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which will also share information within our country, and that information can now be shared to other countries as well. So I think that is the best, right now, that is the best platform for country sharing of threat information. However, there's no limitation, if Rose Telecom will share with VEON with regard to threat information. But institutionally, there's a national cert, and there's a group of certs all over the world to share information. Thank you.
Спасибо вам. Джеки?
Thank you. Jackie, please.
And say 2021. So I don't think we're that far off. I think there is already an informal and a formal framework with the certs. I think the other dynamic that you've drawn attention to is that the governments have worked out it's quite expensive and difficult, and it would be easier if they push the regulation down to service providers so that somebody else can pay for it. Which is actually a tricky strategy, isn't it? It's a good strategy. So I think really the only thing we're missing is the level of certified capability in the machine learning tools that we have to automate that threat information sharing. And I really think we're probably going to be there in the next 6 to 12 months. So I think after that, there's going to be pressure on governments to create a framework that fixes this problem. And because they won't want to pay for that, they'll push it down to regulators. So I think, that'll probably take another year, and the pushback will probably take 6 months, and then we'll be in. So 2021.
Thank you. Спасибо за очень конкретный.
Yeah, thank you indeed for your very specific answer, Valery. I'm probably more conservative. It will certainly take place sooner or later, but not before 2024, I believe. When indeed, in order to have it done, we need some common goals defined. We need to strike some common basis for all of us.
Yesterday, I talked to a vice president of a global company, and he said, we created global cloud, but now our cloud gets disintegrated. So this is what we can feel, even if we talk about our partners. But I'm sure sooner or later we will be forced to do that. Hackers groupings do not have nationality or anything, and in order to counteract them, we must act collectively. Dear colleagues, if you have any questions, you are very welcome. Do we have microphone in the audience? Please. Sorry, I'll speak Russian. Roman Zhukov, Garda Technology, software developer. I have a question to foreign participants. It is in the context of what you discussed during the plenary session. One of the colleagues said, we are ready to consider solutions of all colleagues, no matter what, irrespective of geopolitical things. But as for you, do you feel any pressure or any assistance, say, let's put it this way, assistance from your governments? What does your government do? Do they do something on purpose to prevent cooperation with one or another country? You should not cooperate with this country, but you should go ahead and collaborate with another country. Do you feel any separatism in this respect? And do you think proper level of collaboration, free exchange of data is possible in future? Who would like to answer the question, colleagues? Я с удовольствием начну. Это совершенно замечательный вопрос. На самом деле я с вами полностью соглашусь.
Translate. The geopolitical pressure and, let's call it fake news, in terms of the impression that a citizen of an individual country or a company in an individual country is given based on the geopolitical framework of that country is, often misleading. I think, really we've seen many countries, and I'm sure you can all think of one, who are, policing their citizens and looking at encrypted communications, in a way that they shouldn't be, and perhaps not providing the level of regulation to companies that operate within their boundaries that should be provided in order to keep their citizens safe. So I think it's really difficult to operate or to look at it from a dispassionate manner when, there's a really strict government framework on how we engage. And I think, frankly, it's holding us up. And, that's where I think actually the engagement of companies rather than trying to do it via the governmental organisations, as much as part of it will be economically driven, I actually think it'll be really helpful because, for example, a large part of the dark web, is in the Russian language. Now, there are nuances in that language that, even an Australian who studies, Russian for 10 years is not going to be able to pick up. And unfortunately, the vector for an attack may well be, using Russian-speaking tools or Russian-speaking capabilities, not necessarily because those people are based in Russia, but because, a significant proportion of the tools access is in the Russian language. So I think we've really got to get past that, and I think the economic drivers are going to be very useful to collaboration because, what you kind of get told to think by your government, not necessarily as a specific task, but the impression you have of the way other countries operate is not necessarily helpful in terms of solving the overall cyber problem. And as we know, and as was referenced before, the bad guys don't sit there and go, oh, I'm not meant to talk to this country or that country. They just get the job done, and that's why they're winning.
As a policymaker and a regulator, we can't afford not to talk to any countries. In cybersecurity, the key is information sharing. That's what we've been talking about for more than a decade now. It's information sharing. We can't find the criminal if you don't share information. I came from the law enforcement authority. I've been in the police force for 13 years. We can't solve crime if you don't share information. By just a bottle of beer, you can share information. It doesn't need to be formal. You can. So, in my own opinion, in my country's policy, we cannot afford not to share information with other countries. But it should be symmetrical sharing. It should not be asymmetrical. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think very good points, and I think we are learning as we are going, I would say, all of us, at least I can say for us. And for us, the best is to have a pyramid principle of priorities. First priority is the purpose. Customers are the purpose, and the customers need to get the most secure services, they need to feel, they need to get the consent, and so that's the first entity. Second is we at WION really believe that diversification is good. And we do believe that we should be prepared, have robust plans given on the situation one way or the other. Sharing once automated, we'll embrace, absolutely. And we will actually work together to make that new thing, but which needs to be sustainable. It cannot be not sustainable. So I think that's what I'd say.
Уважаемые коллеги, да, большое спасибо за ваши ответы.
Dear colleagues, thanks a lot for your answers. We have run out of time. That was very quick, and I'm to blame for that. We have to finish at this point, and I would like to invite all those present in this room to use this opportunity and in couloirs or wherever talk to these people that you see in front of you. This is a great opportunity to better understand what's happening in other countries. Otherwise, we'll be continuously doing things in our own environment. So my recommendation is to talk to our esteemed guests. So with this, I would like to thank our panel participants. Thanks a lot. And thank you for visiting us.